Thank you for your attention this morning and your participation today on behalf of the 50 million women and girls who suffer every day in chronic pain. This campaign is about devastating health conditions that at best have been ignored, and at worst the pattern of neglect, dismissal, and discrimination is just the latest example of gaps in the healthcare system that deepen human suffering. We expect to have a couple members of Congress with us. We know that one has been detained in a subcommittee meeting and another is possibly on her way, but as we will just accommodate their presence if they're able to join us. But we do have Elizabeth Lee here on behalf of Representative Tammy Baldwin, who was another one detained in a meeting of her subcommittee. So Elizabeth will come make comments on Representative Baldwin's behalf. Just so you know who Representative Tammy Baldwin is, she was elected to Congress in November 1988 to serve Wisconsin's 2nd Congressional District. She's been a leading advocate for universal health care, civil rights, and for those in our society whose voices are not heard. As a supporter of the Equal Pay Act, the Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, and the Violence Against Women Act, Representative Baldwin has demonstrated her commitment to women's issues time and again. We welcome Elizabeth Lee to read remarks from Representative Baldwin this morning.
Good morning. You just have to picture me a little taller and a little blonder. I'm just going to channel Tammy's Midwest loveliness. Thank you all for inviting me to kick off this event. We are here today to discuss and better understand an issue affecting countless women, but we are also here to take action. I want to congratulate all of you across the country, especially Chris from Rhode Island, on the launch of the campaign to end chronic pain in women, and I and Tammy look forward to working with you in this effort. Chronic pain in women has been overlooked for far too long. Like so many women's health issues, it falls to the bottom of the list in research and funding and in our own lives. Women do not work hard enough to take care of our own health. So not only are we more likely to suffer from chronic pain, we're far more less likely to seek treatment for it, and that must end. I have a constituent, Susan, whose last name is well not mentioned, who lives in Fitchburg, Wisconsin, and Tammy's a good friend of hers. She's suffered from fibromyalgia for 14 years. Usually we get to talk about the great quality of healthcare in Wisconsin. It's a really leading state in terms of quality and low cost, and yet even in the Madison, Wisconsin area, there are very few physicians who are willing to accept a fibromyalgia patient. It's usually because they don't understand the disorder, they don't want to talk about it, or interestingly, they're afraid to prescribe pain medication for fear of addiction and other side effects. So not only do stories like Susan's break our hearts, but they also put a huge strain on our healthcare system. Chronic pain conditions affect 50 million women and cost the country up to $80 billion a year, and yet we only invest $1.30 per affected woman on research. We took some good steps in our healthcare reform legislation to address this. We mandated the Institute of Medicine to hold a conference on pain and look specifically at the issue of gender. We also helped nudge the NIH to step up their game, get a little bit more aggressive on pain research funding. And as you mentioned in your report, which was excellent by the way, NIH really needs to focus more on translation. We need to get what we know, even a little we know now, to patients' bedsides. And we need to make sure that researchers are talking to each other. It seems that women who suffer with chronic pain are rarely affected by just one condition. We have to learn more about the shared pathways and genetic predisposition to pain. I'm pleased that the bill also authorized additional money for Title VII for the training of health professionals in pain care. And a really disturbing part of talking to Susan and from our district and other women, and also in your report, how often our healthcare system exacerbates a woman's situation and makes it worse. They're bounced around to different doctors, they feel ignored, or worse, they feel like they're crazy. And educating health professionals, changing the culture of pain diagnosis and management could really make a difference. So we have a lot more work to do, even though we passed this fabulous healthcare reform. I really like the idea mentioned in today's report about creating centers of excellence in women's pain. Such centers would bring together a range of health experts and serve to be a focal point, but also providers of care. We know that so many chronic pain conditions are overlapping and related, and it makes sense to concentrate and coordinate research and develop best practices. So we took an important first step, and you guys are about to take another big one. So congratulations on the launch of your campaign, and I look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, and thank you to Representative Baldwin. Representative Schakowsky hasn't joined us yet. Representative Janice Schakowsky from Illinois and also Representative Lois Capps from California were scheduled to be here this morning, so if they are able to make it, we will just sort of adapt our schedule to accommodate them. And their presence really was a reflection of the support that this campaign has received from the Congressional Caucus on Women's Issues. And Representative Schakowsky is the co-chair of that caucus, along with Representative Kay Granger, who sends her regards as well. So we are deeply grateful for these members of Congress and the caucus's attention to these issues. Women and men in chronic pain are confronted with considerable challenges in accessing quality health care. And now we would like to share some of the materials that the campaign has developed that depict, distill, and detail the human and financial tolls associated with chronic pain disorders. Terrie is an entrepreneurial filmmaker who has created documentaries for corporations, government entities, and for nonprofits. She founded Great Plains Productions in 2001, and her feature documentary, Rediscovering Dorothy, is currently in production. She will introduce our short film, Through the Maze, Women in Pain. Terrie?
I would first like to thank all the women who told their stories in this video. I think you'll get a real sense of what happens when you are constantly dealing with pain and how your life is affected. But no matter what overlapping conditions these women endure, you'll hear a universal tale of neglect and discrimination, dismissal. Yet they carry on with their lives, and all of them were very inspiring to the people who made the film. It's time we all pay attention, and we hope this production will help a little bit in that.
Thank you, Terrie, and all the women who took part, Chris, for making that film. I've been doing work with the Citizens Association for 20 years, and over 20 years I've heard every single one of those women's statements, so that really rings true. I draw your attention now to our report, Chronic Pain in Women, Neglect, Dismissal, and Discrimination, Analysis and Policy Recommendations, a copy of which was included in your packets. This report was compiled to achieve 4 objectives: to document the burden of impact of chronic pain conditions and circumstances in our present-day healthcare delivery system that lead to ineffective care, inefficient expenditures, and needless suffering. To illustrate 6 conditions marked by chronic pain that often co-occur that have been grossly underfunded in terms of research and largely ignored in the training of healthcare professionals. That's the 2 word charts on the end. The report also outlines the gross disparities that must be addressed if we are to accomplish true healthcare reform, as Elizabeth said earlier. And finally, the report identifies policy recommendations to reduce costs, leverage provisions of the Patient Protection and Affordable Health Care Act, and to reduce the stigmatization and suffering experienced by millions of women and men. Equity demands no less. Kristen Beasley is the Associate Director of the National Vulvodynia Association, one of the partner organizations that helped shape the campaign to end chronic pain in women. You'll recognize Chris from the film, and she'll describe the research disparities that underlie so much suffering. Chris?
Good morning. Thank you all for being here to learn more about these issues and to support women's conditions and women's pain. It's been nearly 20 years since I survived a deadly car crash, and as a result I suffer with chronic pain on a daily basis and have been an advocate for women with vulvodynia for 15 years. And while I can personally attest to the fact that we've made some progress during this time, unfortunately we're far from where we should be. The outlook for too many women with chronic pain is still bleak. Chronic pain doesn't just affect the sufferer, it affects each and every one of us in every part of our society, from our workforce to our rising healthcare bill. And as you just heard in the film, marriages and families suffer, friendships are strained, and careers are stopped in their tracks. And because chronic pain is both invisible and disabling, women confront stigma, they are neglected, dismissed, and face discrimination. And all of this comes with a significant financial cost to the afflicted, her family, and all of us as taxpayers. Vulvodynia alone affects 6 million women in the United States, countless more adolescents, and has been documented in girls as young as 4. and research shows that symptoms usually start early in life, in the teens or 20s, with more than 90% experiencing ongoing pain for many years. This leaves a significant period of unnecessary suffering, unanswered questions, and worry ahead. Women with vulvodynia experience severe burning or other painful symptoms in the genital area, and there's no known cause. Try to remember the last time you burned your hand or your finger on the stove. Imagine if that's how your genital area felt right now. Or if you were sitting on 100 tiny pieces of glass. That's what women with vulvodynia live with each and every day. If that isn't enough, a percentage don't just have vulvodynia. They suffer from multiple overlapping pain conditions or pain in other parts of their bodies. And after 12 consecutive years of congressional requests to appropriately and significantly expand vulvodynia research, the NIH has funded just 12 studies in total, $2 million worth of research in 2009, which is equivalent to just 33 cents per affected woman. What kind of message does this send? Does it communicate that we value women's health and the quality of their life? As a result of an inadequate research effort, many healthcare providers aren't aware of vulvodynia, and women are forced to visit numerous doctors before one of them even believes that their pain is real. They're left to experiment with treatment after treatment because only 2 have been rigorously tested, leaving doctors with virtually no information on which to base treatment recommendations. And in 2010, this is the very best that we can do for women. How do you carry on a normal existence? Forget about working, contributing to society, and attending to your relationships and children. How about just getting out of bed in the morning? This email captures the gravity and essence of women's situations. Dear Chris, I'm so sorry to say that I've never heard of vulvodynia until this weekend when our cousin took her life because of the severity of her pain. We had no idea that she was suffering from this condition, and even when I was told about it, I could not understand how bad it could have been for her. After reading your website and testimonials from other women who somehow managed to live with this condition, I'm beginning to understand just how much she suffered. I feel angry and ignorant that we never knew what she was going through, and I wonder what could have been done for her. What I wonder is, if we'd been appropriately investing in research all of these years, could this have been prevented? And what is it going to finally take to make this happen? We do, although, have reason for hope today. There is something we can do, something that we must do, to change the situation for the better. As documented in the campaign's report, by appropriately investing in research and educating our medical professionals and the public at large, we have a real opportunity to change the lives of millions of American women, their families, our economy, and our society as a whole. And it's only through research that we will better understand these conditions and know which treatments are effective. The medical community at large will learn how to recognize and adequately manage chronic pain, and medical professionals will stop coming to their own conclusions about women and their pain, thereby ending gender discrimination. As healthcare reform moves forward, we implore you to support the report's policy recommendations, to expand research, educate our medical community, and increase public awareness. Equity demands no less, and it demands that we don't delay.
Terrie Cowley is our next speaker. She is director of the TMJ Association, and she's going to speak to you about the recommendations that have to do with educating physicians and healthcare professionals.
I too thank you for being here today. I'm Terrie Cowley, a TMJ patient and president and co-founder of the TMJ Association, patient advocacy organization for the 35 million Americans suffering from this disorder. These Americans, 90% of whom are women in their childbearing years, suffer from excruciating and debilitating pain in the jaw joint area, and surrounding tissues. In our over 20 years, we have heard from more than 100,000 people. Their phone calls, letters, or emails are typical of the one that we received on Saturday. The patients say it best. Julie said, in a nutshell, I'm a 29-year-old female who has been experiencing almost daily headaches, fibromyalgia, and TMJ pain since I was 21. I have tried wisdom tooth removal, numerous painkillers, muscle relaxers, and over-the-counter meds, a mouth guard, deep tissue, and myofascial release massage therapy, acupuncture, cortisone shock, raw food diet, exercise, yoga, upside down inversion table, and an isolated, quiet lifestyle. I just feel hopeless about my situation, and I'm losing a lot of heart. Please help. Woefully inadequate research efforts on chronic pain mechanisms and syndromes has left healthcare professionals ill-equipped to serve the sufferers. In the absence of scientifically based treatments, people are served hit-and-miss trial-and-error treatments and sent on endless referrals. There are over 50 treatments, not including various surgical procedures and an array of medications without scientific basis that are prescribed to TMJ patients. The result is frustratingly inadequate help for those suffering from these conditions that are woefully neglected, and the huge costs to them and our healthcare system are incurred. A 1993 study found that $32 billion was being spent annually on these treatments, which are unproven. To put this in perspective, in 2009, the NIH spent 46 cents per TMJ patient on research. Lack of research about the effectiveness of various treatments is not only expensive, but it places a huge burden on patients, payers, and society as a whole. Women suffering from pain conditions face gender bias, and their pain is perceived to originate from mental illness. The husband of a woman in New Jersey told me that his wife had 11 jaw surgeries. She was in excruciating pain. So he and his wife visited her oral surgeon, who told him, quote, "There is nothing wrong with your wife that a good shrink can't cure." When the woman and her husband got home, he asked her, "He's the expert. Who should I believe, you or him?" She went into the bedroom and shot herself. Several lives were destroyed by that misperception. The costs to patients go beyond dollars. They lose their dreams and hopes of careers, of an education, of family, of a quality of life, and even of life itself. This is why it is so important that cost-effective investment in multidisciplinary research be made now, and that there be a campaign to educate the healthcare professionals and promote awareness among the public about these conditions, as outlined in this report. The discrimination must end. Equity demands no less. I would like to now introduce you to Mary Lou Balwick of the Endometriosis Association.
Now I can ride my bike again. That's what a 13-year-old wrote to one of our best surgeons after 3 surgeries. She is unusual in that for most women it takes an average of 10 years to diagnosis, as is shown in one of the studies up here that we did with the NIH. Endometriosis is not only a hormonal disease, it's also an immunological disorder, a systemic disease, a message that's been hard to get across to our GYN and reproductive endocrinology community. We have girls as young as 8 and 9 years old now suffering with endometriosis, even before their first period. The disease is defined as the inside lining of the uterus, tissue similar to that occurring in other areas of the body. But there's enormous evidence of tremendous immune abnormalities and all of the overlapping conditions, plus some more, represented here today. In research that we did with the NIH, women with endometriosis were found to have a very high risk of 7 autoimmune diseases, and other research has shown numerous cancers in the women and their families. Our research has shown a very strong link to dioxin, a toxic, very toxic chemical, especially prenatal exposure. And our work has been leading the way in reproductive epigenetics. 6.3 million women are conservatively estimated to have endometriosis in the U.S., 89 million worldwide. However, only 13% are diagnosed even in the U.S. Recently, you may have heard this interview with Peter Buffett on NPR. Peter Buffett, a son of Warren Buffett and his wife, the Buffett children were each given $1 billion to set up foundations and to decide how to be philanthropists. Doesn't that sound like fun? I love that. And so they spent several years going around the world trying to decide what was the most undervalued resource. He said, I want to do what my father did, look at undervalued assets and build them until the market sees their value. And they decided after serious research, and I met them, they were very serious about it, that the most undervalued resource in the world is adolescent girls. And I find that's what happens to our girls. We inculcate in them the notion that it is normal to suffer. What a way to come into womanhood. I think that if a disease like this, and the others here affected men, we'd probably see something different. A GYN will tell you, oh, just have a hysterectomy and your ovaries out, which, by the way, does not cure the disease, but that is what they are taught. Think if that was told to a young man. I have a cartoon character named Joe with endo. It's a role reversal. Everything that happens to women happens to him. He says, castration! There has to be something else. The female doctor says, you man, you get so attached to your organs. This is a typical story of the discrimination that occurs with women with endometriosis, not only in the delay to diagnosis, but in the stigma, the taboo, the hush around it. Samantha from California. I'm a 25-year-old child protective services worker. I've had endometriosis symptoms since I started my period. Like most others with the disease, I saw specialist after specialist, had colonoscopies, was told I was a drug seeker, or had depression, or even told I just had gas. And here are all the wasted healthcare dollars in this endless search of incorrectly prescribed different tests, etc., and still no relief. I had a laparoscopy to confirm endometriosis. Finally, I thought the doctors would prescribe the only medication that works for me, Percocet, for the most painful part of my cycle. And I thought they wouldn't question whether I was a drug seeker because I had a real diagnosis. I was wrong. My doctor was very hesitant to prescribe Percocet. I take it only for the most painful times, but when I found myself in a lot of pain and the Percocet was gone, I ended up in the emergency room where they refused to give me the medication and offered Vicodin even though it hurts my stomach. I was in so much pain, I was taking medication every 2 hours until one night I collapsed on my kitchen floor sobbing. Then I vomited all over myself. Knowing that the emergency room would refuse to help me, I had no one to turn to. Actually, we can counsel women not to go to the emergency room because they get treated so badly. It's in your head, you're seeking drugs, they will spend hours there with no medication at all. I live in the USA and have great health insurance, and yet there I found myself in agonizing pain, laying in my own vomit in the kitchen, knowing that there was nothing that anyone was willing to do to help. Obviously, the point being, as in our report, education of healthcare professionals, but we also have to educate the public and make them more aware. Last year, I asked my mother, this is Samantha from California again, why 5 of my aunts have had hysterectomies. My mother had cancer at age 22, had a partial hysterectomy. My mom said that my aunts all had hysterectomies because of endometriosis. They had all kept the reason quiet until my mother asked them. So part of what we have to do is increase public awareness, make it okay for women to even share with each other. I always say this idea that it's natural for women to suffer is kind of like saying God created us defectively. And I simply don't believe that. So I ask you to support this work. As we are all saying, equity demands no less. And thank you.
Because of its trivializing name, chronic fatigue syndrome is not often thought of as a condition that causes pain. But in fact, 5 of the 8 case-defining symptoms reflect pain. Widespread body pain in the muscles and joints, sore throat, headaches, lymph node pain, plus sleep problems, brain fog, and a relapse after light physical or mental exertion of any kind. So think of the worst flu you've ever had, times 10. That is the real chronic fatigue syndrome. As Laura Hillenbrand said during an interview after her book Seabiscuit climbed swiftly to the top of bestseller lists and she was questioned about her battle with CFS that began in 1987, CFS is to fatigue what a nuclear bomb is to a match. It is an absurd characterization. Paula Alford has the toughest job of all this morning. She is here to represent the experiences of up to 50 million women and girls who suffer with chronic pain and the neglect and dismissal that literally adds insult to injury for every woman, man, and child in chronic pain. Paula is here to share her story with us this morning.
I'm amazed listening to all this incredible information from this amazing group of women that after going through so much of this on a personal level my whole life, how much I still have to learn. And I thank all of you. I would like to just start with a little story because I think it's kind of indicative of how people feel about pain. I just finished a long drive to pick up and bring my daughter home from her first year in college. And I extended an invitation to her last night to come with me this morning. And she said, "What are you speaking about?" Like, what? That's really odd. You don't go speak anywhere. And I said, well, I'm actually going to speak about the chronic pain associated with all the disorders I've had over the years, and you'd have to dress up a little bit. And she said, "Mom, please, I've had a front row seat for years dealing with all the pain that's gone on in this household. And guess what? I got to wear my jammies. So thank you very much, but it's my first day home from college. No, thank you." And I sat there, we had a good laugh, and I said, "Hey, I think this is what many people think about a discussion of pain, particularly chronic pain. So what do I think, having lived with it most of my life? I feel it is extremely important to speak out about it. And I say that because it is extremely difficult for women who have had it to speak out about it. My thoughts wander right now to the millions of women and men who would be in too much pain to even come here. Just the travel plans alone are daunting when your body hurts all over. And I also wonder, my thoughts wander especially to my mother, who is has suffered from most of her life undiagnosed endometriosis, and now with other health issues, very severe fibromyalgia in the later years of her life. But this is about my own personal story, and each person with pain has their own personal story. Endometriosis became my lifelong friend over 20 years ago, when one day I passed out in the middle of a sidewalk in downtown DC and just fainted. My gynecologist had been telling me for over a year that the severe pain that I had nothing to do with my efforts to conceive, and that there was absolutely nothing to worry about. Well, passing out on the street, getting hauled to the hospital, got his attention. I got in to see an expert and was diagnosed with very severe endometriosis and was in the operating table within a month. Thus began my life with endometriosis and subsequent 10 surgeries to control the disease, because none of the medications at the time helped me at all. They made me so much sicker and feel so much worse. During that time, I also found out, after being misdiagnosed by numerous doctors and not giving up, that I had fibromyalgia, TMJ, and irritable bowel syndrome. Later on, proper diagnosis, good doctors, more information and knowledge brought me osteoporosis and severe arthritis of the spine. And it's my personal belief that those are connected to all of this as well. My life then, along with the many other people that you've heard about here, has been spent managing these illnesses while trying to pursue a very, very wonderful professional career I had with the federal government, trying to stay married, which you can imagine is not an easy task given all of this, caring for my adopted daughter, who, since she was very young, suffers from depression and severe anxiety, and also for the past 10 years now, caring for my single sister-in-law, single-parent sister-in-law, who was unfortunately diagnosed at the age of 55 with Alzheimer's disease. I also have two sister-in-laws whom I love dearly, both of whom are currently, and hopefully forever, breast cancer survivors. So, I can tell you from first-hand experience, I have seen all kinds of pain. I have seen deep emotional pain, I've seen acute physical pain, I have seen, oh my gosh, you name it, and I've been there, or I felt it, and I've lived with it. Much pain, where's the relief? This is what I feel. Just because a disease does not kill you doesn't mean that the quality of your life, your work, your relationships with others is not affected in a most profound and long-lasting way. Endometriosis caused excruciating pain for me for up to 3 weeks out of the month. And it also meant that I was unable ever to have any birth children. I don't know which is worse going through all that, the pain in the body or the deep pain I experienced many years in my heart. Fibromyalgia also became a good friend of mine 25 years ago. For 2 years, I could not work and was unable to get out of bed until 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I always say, imagine a muscle strain in every muscle of your body times 10, or a vice grip on your muscles. IBS and TMJ, in my case, accompanied my fibromyalgia. And I always like to throw that at its worst. TMJ is like having rocks in your jaw, and IBS is like having your colon on a permanent roller coaster. Despite this, and perhaps because of how lucky I feel in so many other ways, I consider myself a very lucky person because I was able to work. I had a wonderful job, although I had to give it up for 6 months because of my endometriosis and leave my coworkers in the lurch. And that was really hard because one of them suffered from chronic fatigue syndrome. And you have all those feelings that go with that. But I had a great career, albeit the last half of it, I had to work part-time because of all these things. But I've had the financial resources and amazing health care to seek out good doctors and the best surgeons. For the quality of health I have today, and I count it as good as it gets, I am grateful to them, and I'm mostly grateful to myself for taking care of myself. Chronic pain is a funny and fickle friend. It comes with a vengeance. It settles in, and it drains you slowly over time. It can relinquish control just long enough that you have this illusion and hope and feeling, oh my gosh, I'm going to have a life without pain. As I have been fortunate enough to have 6 years before the beginning of this new year in that little void. It was so wonderful. And if you're able to focus and listen to it, it can help you figure out how to ease it sometimes. Just like your very best friend, though, the one thing it never does is go away. It's there with you forever. And so all of us with it continue. I continue. Many people I have known in my life do not know how much pain I've been in, either in fun times, work times, any time. And there are millions of others like me. I've taken a lot of time to reflect in the last few years of my life. And I have learned so much from the mistakes I made managing all of this. I now try to embrace the pain. It's my good buddy. I surrender to the moment. I never give up. I still seek cures. I still take care of myself. And most of all, I just be a lot more in the moments that I have. There really is no other choice, and it also feels awfully great sometimes. My sincere hope for this campaign is that the medical and insurance establishment in this country can find a way to learn from the experience and expertise of those with first-hand knowledge of these overlapping health issues. Fund the research needed to prevent or cure them once and for all. And explore, try out, and reimburse for a myriad of alternative treatment procedures that can give women and men much needed relief. Equity demands no less. Thank you all very much.
Paula, for being so courageous to share that story and to remind us about all the women that have the same spirit that you do in the search for answers about this, while they try to move on and live as high a quality of life as possible. The report, the film, additional patient stories, and other materials are now available on the campaign's official website that went live at about midnight this morning at www.endwomenspain.org, that we hope will be a resource, a reference tool, and a source of inspiration to those in positions to effect policy recommendations needed to end chronic pain in women. Today is just the beginning. You will continue to hear from us and from people across the country whose lives have been impacted by the conditions and who've had the daily experiences we've illustrated. We leave here to meet with leaders of the House and Senate, and we will continue sending our message to policymakers, to the media, and to the public until these issues are resolved. We urge you to leave here thinking about what you can do to change the lives of as many as 50 million American women and girls in chronic pain who suffered chronic disbelief about their suffering. Equity demands no less. We'd be happy to take your questions, and you can direct them either to one of the speakers or me, and I'll try to figure out who might answer if we have any questions this morning. Yes.
Hi, it's Cindy Pearson, National Women's Health Network. This is great. Thank you all so much for being so bold as to put together conditions that most doctors see as so disparate. It's really an advance for women to have this concept that you have, that there's overlapping conditions, that doctors need to talk to each other, women should be looked at holistically. It's wonderful.
Innovation.
Do you have, we're here in the halls of Congress, in the basement halls of Congress, do you have an ask of Congress? Do you want them to direct some part of the government that's supposed to respond to our needs to do something?
We have a series of recommendations in the report that span increased research by NIH, research by CDC to examine these overlapping conditions. CDC has done some research on individual conditions, but we don't know what the prevalence of the overlap and how many women there are, like Paula and others. We have identified a role for the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, or ARC, that works with a lot of the big payers in the system and to do some health care services delivery research. There are also some recommendations that Terrie mentioned about a campaign that would educate healthcare professionals about these conditions, the overlap, and how the presentation, the identification, diagnosis, and care. And then finally, some public awareness efforts that need to be made because of the low diagnosis rate of all of these conditions among the women who have them.
One of the myths that I think we hear back from the administration is that there aren't researchers interested in this area. We should just talk a little bit about, that we don't have people lining up to get this research going.
Well, it's a real chicken and egg thing, but each of the four organizations of the overlapping Conditions Alliance funds medical research. Our organization has funded about $6 million in research, and each of us could speak to the we have a lot of researchers interested in this area, but they don't perceive that NIH and the other funding agencies are interested in funding it. So they don't submit applications. And then NIH says, well, there aren't researchers interested in this because we don't get applications. And so somebody has to move the ball first. And there are a number of mechanisms that are available to the funding agencies, NIH, CDC, that could send an important signal out, especially where these conditions share mechanisms, where the technology in terms of genomics and epigenetics, as Mary Lou mentioned, that could really fast forward our understanding of what's going on before this. Yes?
I'm Jocelyn Alt with Congressman Levin's office. Thank you for doing this. I was wondering if, and maybe it's premature, I guess the question is premature, but if you could speak to the plans for the campaign and what your next steps might be?
Well, as was pointed out, this is sort of a different approach than each of us individually have taken. We've all been to the Hill before. We've all had events similar to this one in the past. But bringing the common experience of people who have these conditions together and looking at where there are shared goals, particularly in the research, the education, and the awareness, I think is a huge step forward. And to put this message out and have it been so warmly received is an important signal to us about the power there is in strengthening our efforts through this coalition of work. So today is really the beginning. Working up to it, it felt like if we can only get to Wednesday at 11:15, it'll all be over. But it's just exactly the opposite. Today it begins, and today we start with this exciting momentum and the interest that people have in more than one sort of isolated experience, but in a common experience of what people go through in the healthcare system we all know to be imperfect, and how people are treated, and what we can do to save money and to save lives. Oh, yes, Mary Lou reminds me that there are additional materials that were not in your packet up here on the shelf behind us. And I'll just let you know again, we have additional copies of the report. We have additional copies of the DVD. If there are other people from committee staffs or other organizations that would be interested in this material, we'd be happy for you to share it with them, and don't want you to leave here with any less than you'd like to take back with you. So again, I think, were there any other questions? Okay, no, great. And we're right on time. We're doing a very tight ship here in the Capitol Visitor Center, so we know we have to clear out. But thank you all again for attending.